I'm very excited to be here with you guys today.
I'm excited to talk to you. Can you tell me about your roots in our New Mexico community?
I was born here my whole life, as they say. I was born in Farmington, but I grew up mostly here in Albuquerque. I went to Albuquerque Public Schools, K through 12. I went away to school in California and New York, and I lived in DC for a while. But New Mexico is and always will be my home. And I think for all New Mexicans, they must put like a honing device in us when we're born, because somehow we all end up back here eventually. And there's nowhere else I'd like to live.
It's a beautiful state.
It's home, yeah.
So can you tell me who or what inspired you to run for office?
You know, I am kind of a reluctant politician. I wasn't planning to run for office, but I think like so many women after the 2016 election and watching what was happening to our country, I felt like I couldn't remain silent. And I had gone to Washington, D.C. to work in the Obama administration and work on the Hill, but my background was in the sciences. I had been working in water resources. I was working on tribal and acequia water rights, and I had worked in the White House and in Congress on those issues. But when I moved home in 2017, literally the day after I moved home, someone asked me in my neighborhood if I would run for office. And it was a bunch of women, of course, who were organizing, and I was like, don't any of you want to run for office? And they were like, nope, we don't want to run. And so we looked at the numbers, and I ran on the same premise that a lot of women ran on that year, that one, if good people don't run for office, the bad guys win. Two, we have to actually run on things that inspire people to want to vote. And three, if we could organize our community, the people who had felt like their voices weren't represented and didn't have a say in what was happening would show up to vote. And that's exactly what happened. And so I ran for the State House in 2018, and we flipped a seat that wasn't even winnable, and we flipped it by 7 points. And then I won it by 10 points the next cycle. And when Secretary Deb Haaland, who was our Congresswoman, left to go be the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, I was tapped to run for that seat, and that's how I ended up in Congress. But you know, I think that for so many people who've been elected since 2016, they have similar stories. And for me, ultimately, though I'm driven by a passion, especially for trying to think about how do we transform our communities so people have opportunity, they have access to the system, and because I have such a passion for land and water rights issues, that's what motivates me. But especially in this time when so much is on the line, I realize how much being a New Mexican matters, and how much my identity of growing up in a low-income family and seeing how people struggle and how hard it is to just access the system and basic resources, that gives me a fight and a sense of purpose and gets me out of bed every morning to go and fight for our people.
It's very admirable. Yeah. New Mexico has been making national headlines for leading and progressive policies. Why do you think New Mexico is such a leader in the nation?
Because we're New Mexicans. No, I'm just kidding. Well, you know, I think actually so much of what's happened politically in New Mexico that has led to big policy changes for New Mexico is in part because of Planned Parenthood votes. So when I first ran for office in the 2018 cycle, one of my first and biggest supporters was actually Planned Parenthood votes. It was Planned Parenthood, it was other progressive groups that were helping to recruit women like me to run, that really invested in and made it possible for us to run on our values and to win, including helping to fundraise for us, to promote our candidacies, and helping to provide the support for us that we could run on issues that we knew could be hard or controversial. In particular, reproductive health is something that in New Mexico, when I ran in 2018, when I came into office and took my oath in 2019, New Mexico still had an antiquated abortion ban on the books from 1969. And there was an effort from the reproductive justice movement to get that taken off the books, if, God forbid, the worst possible thing could happen, which would be Roe being overturned. And at the time, a lot of people said, oh, that'll never happen, they'll never do that. But the foresight was had by Planned Parenthood and other reproductive rights organizations that we had to take that critical action. And we passed it in the House, which I was elected to, but it failed in the Senate. And ultimately, because it failed in the Senate, all of those groups went out and actually helped support more progressive candidates in the Senate. And in 2020, we flipped the Senate as well to not only be a democratically controlled Senate, but the first pro-choice Senate in New Mexico history. And it was a direct result of the work that Planned Parenthood and others had done. And so we were able in 2021 to get that antiquated abortion ban off the books. But in addition to that, we did two other really significant things. We passed one of the most progressive gender-affirming care bills in the United States, as well as civil rights legislation to protect bodily autonomy and the bodily rights of New Mexicans, and especially the LGBTQ plus community. And it set us on a path. Ultimately, last election cycle, we became only the second state in the United States to elect a female majority legislature. And when you take all of that electoral work that's happened over the last several cycles, we transformed the body politic of New Mexico with our own bodies. And then we transformed the politics and the policy. And now New Mexico not only has some of the most progressive reproductive rights and justice legislation, the most progressive LGBTQ rights legislation, we're also the first state in the country to have free childcare and early childhood education, to guarantee free college and trade school, the first Native American voting rights legislation in the country. We transformed the state, and it's because we transformed the people that were representing our communities and created a pathway for them to get there.
That was such an amazing answer. New Mexico is a blue safe state. So why do we need to keep up the pressure to protect our access to abortion care and gender-affirming care?
Well, New Mexico right now is a haven for protecting the civil and human rights of our people. And you know, right now we're actually seeing people move to our state to protect their rights. And we welcome everyone who wants to live here and be a part of that. But that means that it's not safe elsewhere for people, and especially in surrounding states. I hear constantly, especially, you know, friends, family members, colleagues who live in Texas, they're scared. Families, young women, especially families with trans youth in their lives, people are scared right now. And so the fight to protect the rights and bodily autonomy of our people is ongoing here in New Mexico, and we're going to continue to expand those rights and resources, but we have to make sure that it's protected for everyone all across the United States. And that's why we're continuing the fight in Congress to pass the Equality Act. It's why we're fighting this week. There's a healthcare bill on the floor. We're going to fight back against all the attempts to roll back reproductive health care, and why we're fighting to get the Women's Health Protection Act passed in Congress, which not only puts back in place the protections of Roe versus Wade, but also adopts a more modern framework for thinking about what it means to protect the rights of women and all people to control their own bodies.
Yeah, that's awesome. So can you tell me, how are abortion care and gender-affirming care related?
Controlling your own body is a basic human right. It doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what your identity is. Being able to make decisions about your body, what you do with your body, and the opportunities that you have as a human being is essential to your basic humanity, to your basic dignity. And so whether that's making decisions about your reproductive choices and whether or not, or if you have children or can have children, or whether or not you ultimately align your body with the identity that is resonant for who you are, all of those are about basic human dignity. And so the fight for both reproductive justice and for bodily autonomy in reproductive choice are all interrelated together.
Yeah, that's awesome. What gives you hope?
I think that we are living in a time when a lot of people feel hopeless. And what gives me hope is knowing that every generation struggled to move our society, to move the rights, to move justice forward. And though there have been dark chapters in our past, and it feels like this is perhaps one of our darkest, when you look back at the long history of the United States, after every dark chapter, there was a moment, especially when young people helped to move our country forward. Whether it's the post-Civil War period, when we moved forward the voting rights of those who had been formerly enslaved, and then ultimately women, and we, saw the roots of the progressive movement, the labor movement in the late 19th century. After the Great Depression, we had this huge expansion of rights and understanding what the American dream was, and that it wasn't just for people of means, but for everybody. And in the 1960s and 70s, we had the women's movement and the LGBTQ plus movement and the environmental movement and the civil rights movement that led to where we are today and the rights that we have today. One other thing, for me, what gives me hope is really thinking through that historical lens. Because when I think about it, my great-grandmother and grandmother were born in this country before they even had the right to vote. And then my mother, who was a single mother, was the first of so many things. She was the first of many jobs she held. She, raised two little girls who both became elected officials. My older sister was a judge, and I'm now the youngest congresswoman to ever represent this congressional district. And now I'm sitting in a Congress that has the largest number of women ever representing the United States Congress in the history of the United States, in a state that's only the second state to have a female majority. Like, that's change. That's real change. And so when you think about what it's going to be like in the next generation, it's just going to keep moving forward. And so when I think about what will come out of this dark time, what gives me hope is knowing that the next chapter is going to be even another moment when we move things forward. When I look at, for example, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, the way in which the young people in this country think about what's coming next for our country, even when it feels scary and dark and like nothing's going to change, like, you're thinking about the world in a completely different way. And I know that you're going to build a future that's so different than what we could have even imagined, even for us late Gen Xers and millennials who are coming up now in the system. So what gives me hope is knowing that for every generation we struggle, but we do what we can to build a future that's even better. And I know that the generations coming up right now are going to build a future that is so bright and so beautiful and filled with justice and equity. It will be beyond what our grandparents and our grandmothers and great-grandmothers could have even expected.
I agree with that. What is a message you want to leave for students like us?
Keep fighting. I think the message that I would want to leave for the next generation and for students that are in the movement is to remember that you have power. I think that part of this moment that we're living in is that there are a lot of forces that are trying to make you feel powerless and hopeless and helpless. And the continued work of organizing, of speaking up, of speaking out, and continuing to understand the system, and then running for office, all of those ways are ways that we keep creating the change that we believe in. And so I think the main message I want to say is keep doing the work, keep showing up, and remember that your voice is powerful. So keep telling your story, keep doing what you believe in, and keep fighting for what you believe in.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us and allowing us to get to know you a little bit better. I know for me as a student and as a woman here in New Mexico, it's very important to know what's going on and have the support system of other powerful women that really helps us, move forward. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the representation and for opening the doors for so many people.
Well, thank you guys. I'm so excited to see what comes next, and thank you for your advocacy, your work, and keep being strong.